In the beginning, long before the first sun cast a shadow upon a physical world, there was only the Empyrean. This was a realm not of matter, but of pure, living light, an infinite expanse where the resonance of the divine presence created a harmony that sustained all things. At the very center of this celestial architecture stood the most magnificent of all creations. He was known as Lucifer, the morning star, the bearer of light. To describe his beauty is to speak of the impossible. He was a being of such radiant perfection that he seemed to be the very mirror of the Creator's own glory. His wings were not made of feathers, but of woven dawn and crystalline fire, refracting the brilliance of the throne into 1,000 different colors that danced across the halls of heaven. He was the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty, appointed as the highest among the angelic host. In the vast divine hierarchy, Lucifer occupied a position of unparalleled proximity to the source of all existence. He was the anointed cherub, the one who walked amidst the fiery stones of the mountain of God, and led the celestial choirs in their eternal songs of praise, while other archangels like Michael held the mantle of the warrior and the protector. Lucifer was the pinnacle of artistic and intellectual creation. He was the prime minister of the heavens, the one through whom much of the divine light was channeled to the rest of the host. His authority was vast, and his wisdom was so profound that even the most complex mysteries of the cosmos seemed like open books to him. For eons, his devotion was absolute, a flame that burned with a singular holy purpose. However, a subtle and dangerous change began to take root within the morning star. It was not a sudden explosion of malice, but a slow, creeping realization of his own magnificence. As he looked upon the other angels and then upon himself, he began to spend more time contemplating his own reflection in the sea of glass. He saw the way the lesser beings looked at him with awe, and a thought began to fester. If he was the most beautiful, the most wise, and the most powerful, why should he remain a mere servant? The adoration he directed toward the throne began to curve inward. He started to believe that the light he carried was not a reflected gift, but a property of his own essence. The seed of hubris had been planted, and in the silence of his own heart, he began to imagine a reality where he sat upon the highest heights, above the very stars of God. This internal conflict reached a flashpoint when the Creator unveiled a new and mysterious work: humanity. Unlike the angels, who were beings of spirit and fire, these new creatures were formed from the humble dust of the earth. They were fragile, finite, and bound to a physical world. Yet, the divine decree echoed through the corridors of the Empyrean with shocking clarity. The angels, the ancient and mighty spirits of the heavens, were commanded to acknowledge this new creation, to serve and even bow before these beings made of clay and breath. For Lucifer, this was an unbearable humiliation. He viewed the humans as primitive and unworthy, a stain upon the elegance of the celestial order. His pride, now fully matured, would not allow him to bend his knee to a creature he deemed so vastly inferior to himself. Lucifer's refusal was the first crack in the foundation of paradise. He did not simply retreat into silence. His defiance turned into a strategic campaign of subversion. In the quiet, luminous shadows of the crystal spires, he began to approach his fellow angels. He did not speak of evil, but of freedom and sovereignty. He whispered about the perceived unfairness of the divine hierarchy and the supposed indignity of serving a lesser race. His voice, which had once led the most beautiful songs of praise, now wove a tapestry of doubt and resentment. He promised his followers a kingdom where they would be the masters of their own fates, no longer tethered to the whims of a throne that demanded their submission to beings of dust. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. One by one, the lights of heaven began to falter as the great deceiver's words took hold. The celestial host, once a single unified voice of harmony, began to fracture into two distinct camps. A full third of the angelic legions, thousands upon thousands of radiant beings, found themselves seduced by the promise of the morning star. They chose to cast their lot with Lucifer, trading their eternal peace for the promise of self-rule. The atmosphere of the Empyrean, once characterized by absolute tranquility, became heavy with the tension of an impending storm. The unity of eternity had been broken, and for the first time, brothers looked at one another as enemies, setting the stage for a cosmic civil war that would shatter the heavens. The silence that once represented the perfect peace of the Empyrean was replaced by a heavy, suffocating stillness. The celestial music faltered, replaced by hushed whispers and sharpening intent. This was no longer a realm of singular devotion. The brightness of the heavens seemed to dim as the hearts of the created darkened. The division was palpable, a spectral line drawn across the sea of glass. Angels who had spent eons singing in unison now looked upon one another with suspicion and sorrow. The very air of paradise vibrated with the frequency of an impending storm, a cosmic rupture that could never be fully mended or forgotten. Standing at the forefront of the loyalists was the Archangel Michael. He was the mirror image of his brother's former glory, yet defined by duty and unwavering strength. Michael was the protector of the divine order, a being whose existence was anchored in the truth of service. The weight of the coming conflict pressed heavily upon him. He did not seek the blood of his kin, nor did he relish raising a hand against the one he had once called the most radiant of his brothers. He was the silent sentinel of the throne. Yet, as the whispers of rebellion grew into a roar of defiance, Michael stood as the shield, his resolve forged in the eternal fire of absolute loyalty. The war began with a shattering of the celestial harmony that shook the foundations of existence. This was a collision of pure will and cosmic power. On one side stood the legions of the morning star, their wings burning with the cold light of pride. On the other side, the host of Michael moved with the synchronized grace of those who serve a greater purpose. The heavens became a theater of terrifying sights as flashes of spiritual energy tore through the ethereal planes. It was the ultimate clash of ideologies, the absolute ego of the individual versus the total devotion to the divine source that had given them their life and purpose eternally. As the battle raged, a terrifying transformation began to take hold of Lucifer. The corruption of his spirit manifested in his very being. The radiant fire of his wings started to flicker and char, turning into a smoky, obsidian hue. The symmetry of his features twisted into a mask of ungovernable rage. His light, which had once guided the lower orders, became a blinding, deceptive glare. The more he fought to assert his own divinity, the more he lost the qualities that made him divine. He was becoming a hollow vessel, filled only with the bitter essence of his own resentment, a darkness that consumed him from deep within his soul. The conflict reached its zenith at the high gates of the Empyrean. There the two brothers finally met. Lucifer, wreathed in the dark flames of his rebellion, faced Michael, who stood bathed in the pure, unyielding light of the Creator's authority. It was a confrontation of pride against humility. Lucifer struck with the fury of one who believed he was a god, but Michael fought as a conduit of the divine will. That power was insurmountable. With a final strike, Michael drove the rebel leader back. The divine authority acted like an irresistible tide, stripping Lucifer of his standing and casting him from the high eternal realms. The moment of defeat was followed by a silence more terrifying than the war itself. Lucifer was cast out, hurled from the heights into the unfolding void. As he fell, he was no longer the morning star. He was a falling spark, a streak of dying light plummeting through the layers of creation. The warmth of the divine presence receded until it was nothing more than a painful memory. He realized in that agonizing transit that there was no way back. The bridge had been burned. He watched the gates of his home vanish, leaving him to face the cold, empty reality of the abyss he had chosen. The impact was not a physical crash, but a spiritual shattering. When Lucifer finally came to rest, it was in a realm where dawn was an impossibility. The void of the abyss was a wasteland of silence and bitter cold, defined entirely by the absence of the Creator's warmth. The final remnants of his celestial radiance flickered and died. The morning star had officially set, and in the suffocating dark, the Prince of Darkness was born. The very air of the abyss seemed to breathe with his anger. The majestic being who had stood at the right hand of the throne was replaced by a creature of shadow and sharp edges, his heart a furnace of cold, calculating malice. He looked upward, but found only the impenetrable veil of his own exile. The realization settled over him like a shroud. He could never return. The gates of the Empyrean were barred against him forever, but where a lesser spirit might have dissolved into despair, Lucifer found a new, terrible purpose. He could not strike at the Creator directly, but he could strike at the heart of the Creator's newest obsession. He turned his gaze toward the Garden of Eden, where humanity lived in innocent harmony. To Lucifer, these beings were still the inferior clay he had refused to honor, but now they were something more. They were the perfect targets for his revenge. His infiltration of Eden was a subtle corruption. He did not arrive with the overt display of his fallen power. Instead, he chose the form of the serpent, moving through the foliage with a grace that masked his lethal intent. He approached Eve not with threats, but with the same poisonous logic that had fueled his own rebellion. He spoke of enlightenment and the shackles of obedience. With a serpent's voice that still carried the haunting echoes of his ancient celestial wisdom, he meticulously planted the seed of hubris in the human heart. He convinced her that to be like God was better than to be with God. When the fruit was tasted and the first sin was committed, Lucifer felt a surge of dark triumph. He had successfully introduced the infection of pride into the sanctuary of the physical world. He watched as the connection between the Creator and his children was severed, replaced by shame, fear, and the first taste of mortality. It was a tragic victory. While he marred the divine masterpiece, the act only served to cement his own eternal isolation. He had traded the infinite joy of service for the solitary misery of a throne. In this moment, the philosophy that would define his existence was forged. He truly believed it was better to reign in his dark kingdom than to serve in the blinding light of a master he could no longer love. This resentment did not end in the garden. It evolved into a lingering shadow that has followed humanity through every age. Lucifer became the silent antagonist of the human story, a vengeful and restless predator fueling the same cycles of ego and rebellion that led to his own downfall. He exists as the ultimate warning of the dangers of self-worship. The spiritual warfare he began in the Empyrean continues within the quiet chambers of every human soul, a constant struggle between the call of the divine and the seductive whisper of the ego. The story of the fallen star shows more than just a tale of ancient gods and monsters. It mirrors the human condition. Lucifer's journey from the highest peak of perfection to the deepest depths of the abyss serves as a definitive reminder of the fragility of grace. His story teaches us that the greatest heights of talent, beauty, and wisdom are no safeguard against the rot of pride. In the end, the higher the ascent, the more devastating and permanent the fall becomes, leaving behind a legacy of darkness that reminds us that true light is found only in absolute humility.